"Stop being so dramatic," my mom yelled as I clutched my chest. I was 19, sitting on the living room floor, and for a second I thought maybe she was right. Maybe I was being dramatic. My vision was blurry, my heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears, and my brother sat on the couch rolling his eyes like I was putting on a show for him. "He just wants attention," he said flatly, scrolling through his phone. "You always do this when people are finally having a good day." I wanted to yell at him, but it was like my voice got stuck halfway out of my throat. I remember staring at the carpet and thinking, if this is attention-seeking, why can't I breathe? My name is Evan, and I've always been the sensitive one in my family. At least, that's what they called me. My brother, Mason, is the golden child. Varsity soccer, top of his class, everybody's favorite. My parents live for bragging about him to their friends. I'm the one who got told to toughen up when I cried over my first breakup and got grounded for being lazy, when I was working late shifts at the grocery store and overslept the next morning. It was a Saturday afternoon, and we were supposed to be celebrating Mason getting accepted to his dream university. My parents threw a little party with family and neighbors. Cake, barbecue, the whole deal. I had spent the morning helping set up tables and carrying drinks outside, but when I went to grab a plate for myself, my dad told me to let Mason eat first. He's the reason we're all here. So I waited until the line cleared, sat down on the couch with my plate, and tried to stay out of the way. Then it happened. This weird, crushing pressure in my chest. I thought maybe it was just anxiety, since being in the middle of a celebration where no one seemed to notice I existed wasn't exactly relaxing. But the pain didn't stop. It got sharper, deeper, like someone had wrapped a belt around my ribs and was pulling tighter every second. "Mom," I managed to say, putting my plate down on the coffee table. "I think something's wrong." She barely looked up from her conversation with one of the neighbors. "What now, Evan?" she sighed. "I can't breathe right," I said, my voice shaking. That's when she snapped. "You're fine. You've been fine all day. Stop making everything about you. This is Mason's day." I don't know what scared me more, the pain or the fact that no one seemed to believe me. Mason actually laughed under his breath and said something about me being theatrical. I stumbled to the hallway, clutching my chest, and sat down because I thought I was going to pass out. My aunt finally noticed something was wrong and asked if I was okay. I couldn't even answer her. My hands were shaking, and sweat was running down my face. She crouched down, touched my forehead, and yelled for someone to call an ambulance. My mom rolled her eyes but grabbed her phone anyway. When the paramedics arrived 5 minutes later, one of them knelt in front of me and checked my pulse. His face went pale instantly. "Get the stretcher," he shouted to his partner. And just like that, the entire room went silent. I could feel everyone's eyes on me as they strapped me onto the stretcher, my mom standing frozen by the doorway, Mason holding his phone like he didn't know what to do. My heart was still racing, but now there was something else boiling inside me. Anger. That was the first time I realized how alone I really was in my own family. And as they wheeled me out the front door with half the neighborhood watching, all I could think was that I never wanted to feel this powerless again. The hospital kept me overnight for observation. Turned out it wasn't just anxiety, like my mom insisted. I had a heart arrhythmia that made my pulse shoot dangerously high. The doctor told me I was lucky someone had called when they did. If I'd passed out and gone untreated for too long, it could have been much worse. I expected my parents to be worried when they came to pick me up the next morning, maybe even a little apologetic. Instead, my mom walked into the room holding a paper cup of coffee like this was just a minor inconvenience. "Well," she said, glancing at her watch, "at least Mason's party wasn't completely ruined. Your aunt kept everyone entertained." I just stared at her, waiting for something, anything, that sounded like concern. My dad didn't say much either, just asked the doctor how much the ambulance ride was going to cost. On the drive home, Mason was in the back seat with me, tapping away on his phone, probably texting his friends about how dramatic I'd been. My mom turned to me at a red light and said, "You really have to stop scaring people like that, Evan. Do you know how stressful it was for me to make sure the food didn't go cold while the paramedics were in our living room?" I could have. I started, but my throat tightened up. "I could have died," I finally said. She glanced at me through the rearview mirror. "Well, you didn't. So maybe next time, don't overreact and make everyone panic. You embarrassed yourself and us." I felt my jaw clench so hard it hurt. Mason snickered softly. When we got home, I thought I could at least relax, But my dad immediately told me to help clean up the backyard from yesterday. You're fine now, he said, handing me a trash bag. No excuses. I was still dizzy from the medication they'd given me at the hospital, but I picked up plastic cups and plates anyway, just to avoid another argument. Every time I sat down to catch my breath, my mom would pop her head out the back door and say, "Don't just sit there, Evan. You didn't do much yesterday. Make yourself useful." That night, I overheard them talking in the kitchen. "He has to toughen up," my dad said. "If he acts like this in the real world, he's never going to make it. And we can't keep dealing with his health scares," my mom replied. "They're draining. Mason doesn't give us this kind of trouble." I remember lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, my chest still sore, and wondering how I had ended up as the family's punching bag. It wasn't just that they didn't care, it was that they seemed annoyed that I'd scared them. The days that followed felt worse than the arrhythmia itself. My mom started telling relatives the whole thing was just a panic attack, and that I played it up for attention. I heard her say it to my grandmother over the phone. Mason backed her up every time, laughing about how I collapsed because Mason got more attention. The worst was the next weekend. We had another family dinner. Apparently, my near-death experience hadn't slowed down their social calendar. When I got up from the table because I was feeling lightheaded, Mason said loudly, "Careful, guys, Evan might pass out again." Everyone laughed. I froze in the doorway. "Don't be so sensitive," my dad said when he saw my face. "He's just joking." But it didn't feel like a joke. It felt like a warning that no matter what happened to me, it would always be treated like a punchline. I started spending less time at home after that. I'd stay late at work, sit in my car at the park just to avoid walking through the front door. The more I pulled away, the more comments I got about being selfish or ungrateful. My mom said I was trying to make them feel guilty by staying out. I wasn't. Not yet, anyway. But somewhere deep down, I was starting to think about what it would take to make them realize I wasn't just the family's emotional punching bag. The breaking point came a few weeks later, on a night that should have been simple and quiet. I'd just come home from a late shift at the grocery store. It was close to midnight, and my chest was aching from standing on my feet all day. I walked into the kitchen to grab a glass of water, only to find my mom, dad, and Mason sitting around the table like they'd been waiting for me. "We need to talk," my dad said, his tone serious. My stomach dropped. "What did I do?" I asked cautiously. Mom sighed, folding her arms. "You didn't do anything, Evan. That's the problem. You need to start contributing more around here. We've decided that starting next month, you're going to pay rent if you want to keep living here." I blinked at them. "Rent? I'm working part-time and trying to save for school. You know that." Mason smirked. "Maybe if you stop wasting money on snacks and random junk, you'd have enough." "I'm not wasting money," I said, heat rising in my face. "Everything I make goes to gas, food, and my school fund." Dad leaned back in his chair. "Then you'll just have to figure it out. You're almost 20. It's time to start acting like an adult. We're not going to coddle you forever." Coddle me? The word hit like a slap. They acted like I was some pampered kid living off their generosity, not the same person who had almost died in their living room less than a month ago. "What about Mason?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "Is he paying rent?" "No," Mom said flatly. "Mason's focused on school right now. We don't want him distracted." I laughed, a short, bitter sound I barely recognized as my own. "So let me get this straight. I work, I buy my own food, I barely ask you for anything, and you still want me to pay you to live in the house I grew up in? You need to learn responsibility," Dad said, like he was reading from a parenting manual. Something inside me cracked right then. I thought about how I'd been the one mowing the lawn all summer, how I'd been helping with groceries when Mason refused to lift a finger, how I'd cleaned up after his graduation party while they were all cheering his name, and now they wanted more. I went to my room without another word, my pulse racing so hard I thought I might collapse again. I sat on my bed in the dark, staring at the wall, feeling this cold, sharp anger settle in my chest. 2 days later, I came home to find my bedroom door open. My laptop was gone. I panicked, thinking we'd been robbed, until I heard Mason laughing from the living room. He was showing my dad a video on my laptop, a private video I'd recorded weeks ago where I vented about feeling like no one in the family cared about me. "You really think we don't love you?" Mom said, standing behind them with her arms crossed. "Do you know how dramatic you sound? You went through my stuff?" I asked, my voice shaking. "You left it unlocked," Mason said smugly. If you didn't want anyone to see it, you shouldn't have recorded it. My ears were ringing. It wasn't just the invasion of privacy. It was the fact that they were laughing. My pain, my fear, my desperation, a punchline for their amusement. I walked past them without saying a word, grabbed my laptop out of Mason's hands, and went to my room. I locked the door and just sat there, staring at the screen, shaking so hard I could barely type as I changed every password I had. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat awake, listening to the muffled sound of my parents laughing at something on TV, and I made a quiet promise to myself. I would not give them another piece of me to break. And if they wanted to treat me like a burden, like a joke, then one day, I'd show them exactly what it felt like to be left behind. The house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like enemy territory, every room carrying some memory of being mocked, ignored, or dismissed. I stopped talking at dinner, stopped sharing anything about work, school, or my friends. It didn't matter what I said anyway. They'd always steer the conversation back to Mason's plans, Mason's grades, Mason's bright future. I became the shadow that moved around the edges of their perfect family picture. But the real blow came the next paycheck. I'd been saving every cent I could for community college, carefully setting money aside. When I logged into my account that Friday, half of it was gone. I thought it was a bank error at first, but then I saw the transfer. It had gone straight to my parents' joint account. I confronted my mom about it, my hands shaking so hard I nearly dropped my phone. "We told you," she said without an ounce of guilt. "Rent is due. We just took care of it for you this time." "That was my school money," I said, my voice breaking. "You just took it without asking? You should be grateful we're giving you a roof over your head," my dad said from the kitchen doorway. "You're not a kid anymore, Evan. Learn to pull your weight." I felt my chest tighten, not like before, not the medical kind, but the kind that made my throat ache and my eyes burn. I turned and walked straight to my room, closing the door quietly because if I slammed it, they'd just call me immature. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the empty spot in my bank account where months of work used to be. That was the lowest moment, realizing that nothing I did mattered, that I could work myself sick and they would still find a way to take from me. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't do anything that would give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. Instead, I grabbed a notebook from my desk and started writing things down. What I made every paycheck, what I spent, how much I'd need to get my own place. I wrote down my work hours, and I started looking at job postings online for anything that paid better than the grocery store. If they wanted rent, fine, but I wouldn't let them steal my future out from under me. I started picking up extra shifts whenever I could, even if it meant coming home after midnight and leaving again before sunrise. My mom complained that she never saw me anymore, but I just nodded and said nothing. Mason called me the house ghost. Inside, though, something was shifting. Every time they laughed at me, every time they brushed me off, I felt less tied to that house, less guilty about the idea of leaving. It was quiet revenge at first, small acts of reclaiming control. I started locking my door religiously. I bought a small safe with a combination lock and kept my wallet, important papers, and flash drive inside. I stopped sharing any passwords or schedules. By the end of the month, I had almost replaced the money they'd taken from me. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of hope. Tiny, but enough to keep me going. One night, after another long shift, I sat in my car in the driveway and didn't go inside right away. I just sat there in the dark, gripping the steering wheel, imagining what it would feel like to leave for good. Not to run away in anger, not to storm out and slam the door, but to leave on my own terms, quietly, calmly, in a way they wouldn't see coming. And the more I thought about it, the more certain I became that it wasn't just an idea anymore. It was a plan. The next few months became a blur of work, planning, and small, careful victories. I landed a second job at a local print shop, working mornings before my grocery store shifts. The pay wasn't glamorous, but the owner, Mr. Callahan, was the kind of person who noticed when you worked hard. After my first week, he gave me extra hours and let me train on the front desk instead of just stocking paper in the back. It was exhausting. There were days I barely slept more than a few hours, but every paycheck felt like a step closer to freedom. Watching the balance in my savings account climb again was the one thing that made the bone-deep fatigue worth it. I also started teaching myself skills that would make leaving easier. I watched videos about renting apartments, building credit, budgeting for utilities. I even started looking at online classes in graphic design, since I liked the work I was doing at the print shop. At home, I kept my mouth shut. I paid the rent without arguing, but every time I handed my parents that envelope, I reminded myself it was temporary. Mason kept teasing me, calling me the tenant, but I didn't rise to it. And that's what started to scare them, my silence. One evening, I came home from work and found my mom sitting on the couch with her arms crossed. "You've been acting strange lately," she said. "You barely talk to us. You're out of the house all the time." "I'm working," I said simply, setting down my bag. "You're avoiding us," she pressed. "If you have a problem with this family, you should say it to our faces instead of sulking." I just shrugged. Nothing to say. She didn't like that. Mom thrives on arguments. It gives her something to win. The fact that I wasn't giving her a fight seemed to frustrate her more than any shouting match could have. Mason, meanwhile, was starting to slip. He'd always been the star student, but now that he was at university, his grades weren't as perfect as before. He came home one weekend furious about getting a C on a paper, and my parents spent the whole dinner reassuring him that everyone struggles their first semester. Then they turned to me and asked if I could take on an extra share of chores since Mason has so much on his plate. I nodded, smiling just a little. Sure, because the truth was, I'd already started house hunting. I found a tiny studio apartment above a bakery a few towns over. It wasn't fancy, just one room with a kitchenette and a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in. But when I stood in the doorway and looked around, I could picture my things there. My life there. I didn't sign the lease right away. I wanted to be sure. So I went back to work, saved for another month, and kept building my cushion until I had enough to cover rent, deposit, and at least 3 months of expenses. The day I finally signed, I felt this quiet surge of power. Not loud, not triumphant, but steady, like something in my chest had finally clicked into place. At dinner that night, Mason made another one of his jokes about me, fainting if I had to carry anything heavier than a textbook. I just smiled, because I knew that in a few weeks, he'd be eating dinner at that table without me sitting across from him. And they wouldn't even see it coming. The lease was signed, the deposit was paid, and the key sat in my pocket like a secret no one could touch. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. But I didn't want to just leave quietly. Not anymore. I wanted them to understand what they had done, not just to notice my absence, but to feel it. To sit in that house and realize they had pushed me out, piece by piece, until there was nothing left of me for them to control. I didn't say a word to anyone about the apartment. I started moving my belongings little by little, packing only when I was sure no one was home. The safe with my documents went first, then my computer, then clothes, books, and the few personal things that actually mattered to me. Every trip to the new apartment felt like I was peeling another layer of myself out of that house. My room started to look emptier, but I made sure to keep it just messy enough that it didn't raise suspicion. The real turning point came one Saturday afternoon when I stopped by the print shop on my day off. Mr. Callahan called me into the back office and handed me an envelope. "You've been putting in a lot of hours here," he said. "I know you mentioned wanting to take classes, so consider this a little head start." Inside was a bonus check, more money than I'd seen in one place at once. I thanked him, probably too many times, but when I walked out of the shop and sat in my car, I just stared at the check, stunned. This was it. This was the last piece I needed to cut ties without fear. I used part of the money to prepay my rent 2 months ahead. The rest went into furnishing the apartment. A bed, a secondhand desk, a chair. It wasn't much, but it was mine. At home, the atmosphere was shifting. My parents had started making more comments about my disappearing act. "Are you hiding something from us?" my mom asked one night after dinner. "No," I said, keeping my face carefully neutral. "You're too quiet," she pressed. "It feels like you're just waiting to pounce with some big announcement." I almost smiled at that, because she was half right. Mason had his own issues brewing. He'd just gotten into a fight with his professor over a late paper and spent the evening sulking, complaining that no one understood how hard he had it. My parents coddled him, made his favorite dinner, and told him they'd cover his textbooks next semester so he wouldn't be distracted by money. I sat there eating my food, silent, already calculating which night would be the last one I'd sit at that table. I didn't want to storm out or yell. That would give them a chance to play the victims. No, I wanted my absence to be the thing that haunted them. I started keeping my car gassed up, my bag packed with a few essentials. just in case the moment presented itself earlier than planned. And in the meantime, I kept acting normal. Well, normal enough to keep them from guessing what was coming. Because when I finally left, I wasn't just going to disappear. I was going to leave behind a silence so loud they wouldn't be able to ignore it. It happened on a Thursday night, almost by accident. I came home late from the print shop, exhausted but strangely calm. The house was quiet. No TV blaring, no Mason's music shaking the walls. My parents were in the kitchen talking softly, and for a moment I just stood in the entryway, listening to the sound of my own breathing. Something in me clicked. I walked straight to my room, shut the door, and looked around one last time. The bed was made, the shelves nearly empty, my clothes already gone except for a single jacket hanging in the closet. I opened my drawer, pulled out the last envelope of cash I'd been saving, and slid it under my pillow, my rent for the month. Then I took out a piece of paper and started writing. It wasn't angry or dramatic, no accusations, no yelling in ink. Just a single page, written in my neatest handwriting. I've paid my rent for this month in advance. After tonight, you won't have to worry about me pulling my weight anymore. Please don't contact me unless it's an emergency. I'm safe. I just can't live like this any longer. I folded the note and left it on the kitchen table, right next to the fruit bowl where I knew they couldn't miss it. Then I grabbed my bag, walked out to my car, and drove away without looking back. When I got to the apartment, I didn't even turn on the lights at first. I just stood in the middle of the room, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator, feeling my chest rise and fall. I was free. The next morning, I woke up to 12 missed calls from my mom, 6 from my dad, and 3 texts from Mason that ranged from, "Where are you?" to, "Are you serious right now?" I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I went about my day as usual. Went to work, had lunch, set up a small plant on the windowsill of my apartment. By the time I finally called my parents back that evening, they were frantic. "Evan, what do you think you're doing?" my mom demanded. "You can't just leave without telling us." "I did tell you," I said calmly. "There's a note on the table." "That's not the same thing," she snapped. "Do you have any idea how worried we've been?" "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "And that's how I felt every time I was sitting in that house, wondering if anyone cared what happened to me." Silence. For the first time in months, no one interrupted me, no one dismissed me, no one laughed. "I'm not coming back," I said finally. "I hope you understand why." I hung up before they could argue. It was the quietest kind of revenge. No shouting, no slammed doors, but it was exactly what I needed. I had left on my own terms, with my own money, and there was nothing they could take from me anymore. And judging by the next few texts I got from Mason, angry, confused, almost pleading, I knew it was working. They weren't laughing anymore. The first week after I left was quiet, almost eerily so. Then the calls started coming in earnest. First from my mom, then from my dad, and eventually from relatives I hadn't heard from in months. "Your parents are worried sick," my aunt said over the phone. "They said you ran away." "I didn't run away," I told her calmly. "I moved out." There's a difference. That seemed to spread through the family like wildfire, because the next day my mom sent me a text that was almost apologetic. Almost. "We just don't understand why you had to do this," she wrote. "If you felt so bad, you should have told us. We would have helped." I stared at the message for a long time before replying. "I did tell you. You just called me dramatic." No response came after that. 2 weeks later, Mason called me out of the blue, which almost never happened unless he needed something. "Mom and Dad are losing it," he said, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. "They keep saying the house feels empty. Dad even had to mow the lawn himself last weekend." I almost smiled at that. "You're the golden child," I said lightly. "Guess it's your turn to carry the weight." He didn't laugh. "Look, I know I was a jerk. I shouldn't have gone through your stuff." I thought it was funny at the time, but I guess it wasn't. That was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever get from him, and it was enough for me to finally let go of the anger I'd been carrying. But I didn't go back. Months passed, and I kept building my life. The apartment slowly turned into a real home. Posters on the walls, my own dishes in the cabinets, a desk where I started doing freelance design work on the side. My savings grew, my health stabilized, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was steering my own life instead of being dragged along. One afternoon, I drove past my old neighborhood. The house was still there, still perfect and tidy on the outside, but I didn't stop. Later that night, my phone buzzed with a message from my mom. "We miss you." The house isn't the same without you. When you're ready, maybe we can talk. I put the phone down on the table and looked around my little apartment. The soft glow of the lamp, the plant on the windowsill, the quiet hum of my own space. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty about the silence. I texted back one line. I'm not coming back, but I hope you finally understand why. Then I turned off my phone, leaned back in my chair, and let the quiet fill the room. Not heavy this time, but peaceful. For the first time in my life, it was my silence, and it was exactly what I wanted. My name's Caleb, I'm 22, and I grew up in what I like to call the golden child household. My parents adored my younger brother, Mason, like he was some kind of royalty, while I was more or less treated like the family handyman. We weren't poor. My dad's an accountant, my mom works in real estate, but you'd never know it by how differently they treated us. Mason always got the best of everything. New clothes every season, the latest gaming consoles, even private sports lessons. Meanwhile, I got whatever was left over, or worse, got told to make do. I always thought that if I just worked hard, kept my head down, and didn't cause trouble, they'd eventually see me as an equal. Spoiler, they didn't. Every family dinner turned into some lecture about how I wasn't pulling my weight, or how Mason had so much potential compared to me. I tried to brush it off, telling myself that once I turned 18, I'd carve my own path. And for a while, I really did. I got a part-time job while going to college, paid for my own phone, and even bought a beat-up used car with my own savings. I thought I was finally earning their respect. Then came Mason's 18th birthday, the day that ripped away whatever hope I had that things would ever change. My parents threw him a massive backyard party, the kind they never bothered to throw for me. There was a rented tent, balloons, even a cake from that expensive bakery downtown. I came home from work halfway through, sweaty and exhausted from a double shift, but I put on a smile and joined in. Everyone was gathered around when Dad pulled Mason aside with a huge grin. "Close your eyes," he said, dangling something shiny. When Mason opened his eyes, he was holding a set of car keys. My parents had bought him a brand new car, a shiny, red sedan sitting in the driveway with a bow on top. Everyone cheered. Mason looked like he'd just won the lottery, and Dad clapped him on the back saying, "You've earned this." I tried to stay calm, telling myself maybe they had something for me too, some little sign that they were proud of me. When it was my turn to get a gift, Mom handed me a box. I opened it and felt my stomach drop. It was filled with cleaning supplies, sponges, a broom, a bottle of multipurpose cleaner. Mom smirked and said, "Now you can start pulling your weight around here." Mason laughed so hard he nearly dropped his new car keys. The guests chuckled awkwardly, and someone even said, "That's practical, I guess." My face was burning, but I forced a small smile. "Thanks," I said quietly, though inside I felt something snap. That night, I lay awake in my room, staring at the ceiling while Mason revved his new car outside just to show off. I kept replaying the moment over and over in my head. The look on Mom's face, the way Dad beamed with pride at Mason, the sound of their laughter at my expense. It wasn't just about the car. It was about years of being treated like an afterthought. By midnight, I'd made up my mind. I packed a duffel bag with my clothes, grabbed the small lockbox of cash I'd been saving from work, and slipped out the front door. I didn't leave a note. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "When are you coming back?" No apology, no explanation, just the assumption that I'd eventually crawl back like always. I stared at the screen for a long time before putting my phone on silent. For the first time in my life, I felt a strange sense of calm. But I also knew this was just the beginning. I didn't go far at first, just crashed on a friend's couch for a few nights while I figured out my next move. My friend Alex was the kind of guy who could make even the worst situations feel manageable. When I showed up at his door with my duffel bag, he didn't ask questions. He just handed me a blanket and said, "Guest room's yours. We'll talk in the morning." For a few days, I felt like I could breathe again. I picked up extra shifts at work, started saving even more aggressively, and stayed busy enough not to think about home. But my parents weren't about to let me have peace for long. On the fourth day, I woke up to a flood of texts from Mom. "Where are you? You can't just leave like that. We have chores that need doing. Mason's been swamped with schoolwork, and you're putting all the burden on us. Your brother needs the car for practice, but now he has to clean the garage himself? Unbelievable." I almost laughed. They were really upset because Mason had to clean the garage once, the same garage I'd been expected to clean every month since I was 13. When I didn't respond, the texts kept coming, turning from guilt trips to passive-aggressive jabs. I guess you don't care about this family. Running away solves nothing. You're acting like a child. Dad finally called me that night. His tone was calm at first, like he was trying to be reasonable. Caleb, you've made your point. You were upset. We get it. Now come home. Mason's birthday week isn't the time for drama. I took a slow breath, staring at the wall. This isn't about drama, Dad. It's about how you treat me. You bought Mason a car and gave me cleaning supplies. You humiliated me in front of everyone. There was a pause, then Dad sighed. You're overreacting. We just thought it would be funny. And besides, Mason has worked really hard. I've worked hard too. I snapped before I could stop myself. I've been paying my own bills since I was 17, working double shifts just to stay afloat. But you only ever praise him. You don't see me. Dad's voice went cold. If you want to be treated like an adult, then act like one. Adults don't run away when they don't get what they want. The conversation ended with me hanging up. My hands were shaking, but for once, I didn't feel guilty. A few days later, I got a picture from Mason. He was standing next to his new car, flashing a thumbs up, with the caption, "You should have stayed. Just washed it. Looks amazing." It felt like a slap in the face. 2 weeks passed, and the silence from me must have gotten to them, because Mom finally showed up at my work. I was wiping down tables when she walked in, arms crossed, that tight-lipped smile on her face. "Caleb," she said, loud enough for my coworkers to hear. "This has gone on long enough. You're embarrassing us. People are asking why you aren't home." I put the rag down slowly. "I'm not coming home." Her smile dropped. "Excuse me. I'm done being the family doormat," I said, my voice steady even though my chest was pounding. "I'm not going back just so you can keep treating me like a second-class citizen." Her nostrils flared. "We've given you everything, Caleb. A roof over your head, food, clothes." I actually laughed at that. "You gave Mason everything. You gave me the bare minimum and expected me to be grateful for it. I'm done." She didn't yell, but her voice turned icy. "Fine, but don't come crawling back when you realize the world is a lot harsher without us." Then she turned and walked out, leaving me standing there with every eye in the restaurant on me. That night, Alex and I sat on the balcony drinking cheap soda while I tried to make sense of everything. "You know," Alex said, "maybe this is what you needed. A clean break. Build your own life." I nodded slowly, but deep down, something sharper was forming. I wasn't just going to build my own life. I was going to make it so good, so undeniably successful, that they'd regret ever laughing at me with that box of cleaning supplies. And soon, they'd get their first taste of just how serious I was. 2 weeks later, just when I thought the storm was finally dying down, I got blindsided. It was a Friday afternoon, and I had just clocked out of work, exhausted but feeling good because I had managed to pick up enough shifts to cover rent for the next month. I grabbed my phone and saw a string of new notifications, texts, missed calls, and one voicemail from my bank. My stomach dropped. When I called back, the woman on the line sounded apologetic but firm. "Hi, Caleb. We just wanted to confirm you authorized the $1,200 withdrawal from your savings account this morning." I felt my throat tighten. "What withdrawal? I didn't authorize anything." After a pause, she said, "It was done in person. The person had your account number and matching ID." Matching ID. I knew instantly who it was. I drove straight to the bank, my hands gripping the wheels so hard they hurt. The teller confirmed it. Someone had come in with my old spare debit card, the one I kept in my desk drawer, and used a photocopy of my license to access my savings. The security footage showed Mason. I sat there, staring at the grainy, still image of my brother smiling at the teller like it was just another errand. "What did he say it was for?" I asked. The teller hesitated. "He said you told him to take it out for a family emergency." My chest burned. A family emergency. I didn't go home that night. Not to Alex's, not anywhere. I just sat in my car at an empty gas station parking lot until almost 2 a.m., trying to wrap my head around it. Mason hadn't just taken my money. He had pretended to be me. And my parents had clearly helped him. There was no way he had a copy of my license without their involvement. When I finally turned my phone back on, there were new messages waiting for me. From Mom. "We used some of your savings to pay Mason's insurance and registration. You weren't using it anyway." From Dad. "Be grateful we didn't touch the rest." This is what family does. We help each other out. I couldn't breathe. Be grateful? I typed and deleted half a dozen replies before finally sending. That money was for school. You had no right. Mom responded almost immediately. Don't be dramatic. You're living rent-free with friends, aren't you? Stop acting like a victim. Mason needs that car to get to practice. That was the moment something inside me truly broke. This wasn't just favoritism anymore. This was theft, dressed up as family helping family. They didn't just see me as less important. They saw me as a resource to be used whenever they pleased. The next morning, Mason sent me a selfie with his car, this time with a brand new set of custom rims. Thanks, bro. The caption read, followed by 3 laughing emojis. My hands shook as I stared at the screen. There it was, the final confirmation that they didn't take me seriously, that they thought they could keep crossing lines without consequences. I didn't reply. Instead, I started researching how to freeze my account, change my banking information, and make sure not a single cent of mine could ever be touched without my permission again. But as much as I tried to stay calm and rational, I couldn't shake the image of Mason walking into the bank with my ID, grinning as he drained my savings like it was nothing. That image played on a loop in my head, fueling something new: resolve. I wasn't just going to cut them off. I was going to make sure they understood what it felt like to be powerless, to have something important taken away from you, and to know there was nothing you could do to get it back. And for the first time, I started to think not just about leaving them behind, but about revenge. After the bank incident, everything felt heavier: my shifts at work, my mornings, even simple conversations with Alex. I had enough money left to keep myself afloat, but watching my savings disappear overnight cut deeper than I expected. That money was my safety net, my one step toward independence, and now it was gone because my parents and brother decided Mason's new rims were more important than my future. I started running on fumes. I'd lie awake at night staring at the ceiling of Alex's guest room, doing mental math over and over, wondering how I was going to keep up with tuition next semester. Every time I'd start to drift off, I'd see Mason's smug selfie again, those 3 laughing emojis flashing like neon signs in my brain. At work, I was quieter. My manager even pulled me aside one night. "You doing okay, man? You look tired." I forced a small smile and lied. "Just a lot going on." The truth was, I felt like I was sinking. My parents weren't just ignoring me anymore. They were actively making my life harder. I got a notice from my health insurance company saying my coverage was suspended because the primary policyholder hadn't paid the premium. Turns out my dad had removed me from the family plan without warning. When I called him, his response was cold. "You wanted to be independent, so pay for your own insurance." Adults do that. I didn't argue. I just stared at my phone for a long time after the call ended, feeling my chest tighten until it almost hurt. That weekend, I went back to my childhood home for the first time since leaving. Not to talk, just to get my stuff. Alex came with me, mostly for backup, and we drove there in silence. When we pulled up, Mason's car was front and center in the driveway, gleaming like a trophy. I walked past it without a word, but I couldn't stop my jaw from tightening when I saw the shiny new rims. Mom met us at the door, arms crossed. "So you finally decided to show your face." I didn't answer. I went straight to my room and started packing everything I owned into boxes: clothes, books, a few keepsakes. Mason leaned in the doorway, munching on a bag of chips, grinning. "Relax, bro," he said. "It's not like we stole all your money. You should have seen Dad. He argued with the bank about them charging a fee. Total win." I didn't even look at him. "Get out of my room." He laughed. "You can't kick me out. This is still my house." Alex stepped forward then, his voice low but sharp. He said, "Get out." Mason muttered something under his breath and left, but the smirk on his face stayed burned in my mind. By the time I was done, my room looked empty, almost foreign. Mom stood at the bottom of the stairs as I carried out the last box. "You're making a big mistake, Caleb," she said, shaking her head. "Family is all you have in this world." I stopped just long enough to meet her eyes. "Then maybe I'd rather have nothing." The words hung in the air for a long moment before I turned and walked out. That night, back at Alex's place, we stacked the boxes in the corner of the room, and I sat on the floor staring at them. It hit me all at once. This was it. There was no going back now. I had burned my last bridge. But in the quiet of that night, something shifted. I stopped thinking about what I had lost, the money, the safety net, even the family I wished I had, and started thinking about what I could build. I opened my laptop and began applying for better jobs. I searched for scholarships, grants, anything that could help me finish school without relying on my parents. I even started watching videos on budgeting and personal finance, scribbling notes in a worn notebook Alex gave me. For the first time, my anger wasn't just an open wound. It was fuel. I didn't want to just escape my family's control. I wanted to become someone they couldn't ignore. Someone whose success would make them realize, too late, that they had thrown away the best thing they had. I wasn't there yet. I was still broke, still sleeping in a borrowed room, still figuring out how to rebuild from nothing. But in that moment, I made myself a promise. One day, I'd make them regret ever handing me that box of cleaning supplies. The first few months after leaving home were brutal, but slowly, things started to shift. I landed a better job at a local logistics company after a manager saw my work ethic at the restaurant and offered to recommend me. It paid more than minimum wage, and the hours were consistent enough that I could finally breathe a little. I moved from Alex's guest room into a tiny studio apartment, barely bigger than my old bedroom, but it was mine. No one could barge in without knocking, no one could tell me what to do with my space, and no one could touch my money. I kept my head down, saved aggressively, and took every extra shift I could. At night, when I wasn't working, I was learning. Budgeting, investing, basic car maintenance, things I'd never had the chance to really focus on before. My notebook filled with plans and goals. I even got into online freelancing, taking on small projects to bring in extra cash. And bit by bit, I started to feel like I was in control of my life. Months passed, and while I didn't hear much from my parents, the few times they did text me were telling. From Mom, "You still haven't come home? Mason could really use your help around the house." From Dad, "We're disappointed, Caleb. You're letting pride ruin this family." I didn't reply. Then one evening, after a particularly long shift, I got a message from an old professor. He told me about a scholarship I qualified for and urged me to apply. I stayed up all night writing the essay, and when I got the acceptance email 2 weeks later, I nearly shouted out loud in my apartment. The scholarship covered almost all of my tuition. For the first time since leaving home, I felt free. With my savings growing and school covered, I allowed myself one small splurge, a used car. Nothing fancy, but it ran well, and it was mine. The day I drove it home, I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment before getting out, just smiling to myself. That night, Mason texted me out of the blue. "Saw you got a car. Finally catching up, huh?" I ignored him, but deep down, I knew he was keeping tabs on me, and that my progress bothered him more than he'd ever admit. A few months later, I got promoted at work. The logistics company recognized my reliability and gave me a supervisor role. It wasn't glamorous, but it meant better pay, better hours, and more respect. I could feel the distance between me and my family growing, not just emotionally, but financially, professionally, even mentally. The Caleb they used to control, the one they could guilt, manipulate, or drain whenever it suited them, was gone. But then, just as things were finally starting to look stable, they reached out again. This time with something bigger than guilt trips or demands for chores. Mom called me one evening. I almost didn't answer, but something in me wanted to know what she could possibly want after so long. "Caleb," she said, her voice sugary sweet, "we were thinking of having a family dinner next weekend. It's been too long. Mason would love to see you." I hesitated. "What's the catch?" "There's no catch," she insisted. "We just miss you." But I could hear something in her tone, that faint edge of calculation I'd grown up with. Whatever this was, it wasn't just about dinner. I hung up with a polite, non-committal answer, but my mind was already racing. They wanted something. They always did. And for the first time, instead of dreading it, I found myself almost looking forward to finding out what game they were playing. Because now, I had something I'd never had before: leverage. The family dinner was set for Saturday evening, and though every part of me wanted to ignore it, curiosity won. I needed to know what they were planning. I arrived early enough to watch from the street for a minute before going in. Mason's car was in the driveway, now with even more upgrades: tinted windows, a flashy new spoiler, and a vanity plate that literally said MVP. I almost laughed out loud. When I finally knocked, Mom opened the door like we were best friends. "Caleb," she said brightly, pulling me into a hug that felt rehearsed. "Look at you. You've been working out." I hadn't, really, but I could tell she was laying it on thick. Dad came over and clapped me on the back. "Son, good to see you." We sat down to dinner, and for a while, they pretended everything was normal. Mason bragged about his car mods, his weekend trips with friends, and some new internship Dad had helped him land. I listened quietly, focusing on my plate, until I noticed Dad exchanging a look with Mom. Finally, Dad cleared his throat. So, Caleb, we wanted to talk to you about something important. I set my fork down slowly. I figured. He leaned forward, folding his hands like he was about to offer me a business deal. We're in a bit of a financial bind right now. Your mom's real estate commissions have been down this quarter, and there's an upcoming payment for Mason's school and car insurance. We thought, since you're doing well for yourself now, you could pitch in. I stared at him, stunned. You want me to pay for Mason's car? Mom jumped in quickly. Not all of it. Just a few months of coverage until things settle down. You know how important that car is for him. He's got practices, interviews. I laughed. I actually laughed at the table, and the sound made Mason glare at me. So let me get this straight, I said. You stole from me to pay for his insurance once, and now you're asking me to willingly do it again. Dad's face hardened. This isn't about the past. This is about helping the family. Something in me clicked in that moment. Not anger, not hurt, but clarity. They hadn't changed. They weren't going to change. And here they were, practically handing me the perfect setup. I smiled calmly. I'll think about it, I said, my tone deliberately even. Mom's face softened with relief. We knew you'd come around. But as I drove away that night, I wasn't thinking about helping them. I was thinking about every late night I'd worked, every lecture I'd sat through about how I wasn't doing enough, every time they'd chosen Mason over me. And I realized something important. I finally had the power to choose how this played out. I had a stable job, a growing savings account, and a level of independence they couldn't touch. I knew people now, co-workers, professors, friends, who respected me, who saw my value without conditions. If my parents wanted my help, they were going to have to see me differently. They were going to have to understand what it felt like to need me. So, over the next few weeks, I started to plan. Quietly, carefully. I looked into exactly how much debt they might be in. You'd be surprised what you can find when you know which public records to check. I learned that my parents had refinanced the house recently, pulling equity to cover Mason's car purchase and other expenses. They were stretched thin. I also started working extra hours again, not because I needed to, but because I had a very specific goal now: to build a financial cushion big enough to ensure that whatever move I made next, I wouldn't have to hold back. And the more I learned, the clearer my plan became. I wasn't just going to say no to their request. I was going to make sure they felt the weight of every single choice they had made. I didn't rush it. The beauty of revenge, I realized, is in the patience. Over the next few months, I made myself scarce. I responded to my parents' texts with vague, polite answers. Nothing they could accuse me of being rude about, but nothing that committed me to helping them either. Meanwhile, I kept building my war chest. My savings grew steadily, and I even picked up a side gig doing remote work for a small tech startup that paid surprisingly well. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just staying afloat. I was ahead. Then, one afternoon, I got a voicemail from Mom that sounded different. Her voice was tighter, strained. Caleb, we really need to talk. It's important. Please call us back. I didn't call right away. Instead, I waited a day, then texted, I'm free this weekend. Dinner. When I arrived, the atmosphere was different from the last time. Gone was the smugness, the forced cheerfulness. Dad looked tired, Mom was fidgeting, and Mason, for once, wasn't smirking. We're behind on payments, Dad admitted after a long pause. The bank is threatening to repossess Mason's car if we can't make up what we owe. I let out a low whistle, as though I were just another sympathetic bystander. That's rough. Mom leaned forward, her tone desperate now. Caleb, if you could just help us get through this month, we'd pay you back as soon as we can. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I smiled slowly, calmly, like I was weighing it over. I could help, I said carefully, but it would have to be on my terms. Dad narrowed his eyes. What terms? I leaned back in my chair, taking my time. I want everything in writing. Every dollar I give you, I want a signed agreement that it's a loan. With interest. I'm not just handing money over to be used and forgotten again. Mason bristled. That's ridiculous. We're family. I turned to him and said evenly, family doesn't empty your bank account without asking. Family doesn't laugh while you're humiliated in front of guests. So either we do this my way, or I walk out that door and you can figure it out yourselves." The room went dead silent. Finally, Dad exhaled slowly. "Fine. We'll do it your way." Over the next few days, I drafted a proper contract. Nothing over the top, just a legally binding agreement that spelled out exactly how much I was lending them and the timeline for repayment. I even had a lawyer friend look it over. When I brought it back for them to sign, I made sure to meet their eyes as they each put pen to paper. The power shift was palpable. For once, I wasn't the one being lectured, guilt-tripped, or manipulated. I was in control. When the transfer was done, Mason muttered something about me being dramatic, but he didn't look nearly as confident as he had months ago when he was grinning at me from the bank's security footage. And I wasn't done yet. Because as soon as I walked out of their house, I called a cousin who I knew was always looking for work and offered to connect him with an opening at my company. If he got hired, and I knew he would, he'd be making more than Mason within 6 months. Not because I needed to win, but because I wanted my parents to have a front row seat to what happens when you bet on the wrong horse. And the best part? I still hadn't cashed the check I was going to use to cover their payment. If they missed even one installment of the repayment plan, I had a perfectly legal route to escalate. One that would force them to confront, in black and white, just how far they had pushed me away. As I drove home that night, I realized something. Revenge didn't have to be loud. It didn't have to be explosive. Sometimes the most satisfying revenge is quiet, controlled, and undeniable, the kind that leaves no doubt in anyone's mind about who really holds the power now. And my parents were just starting to realize it. The first month passed, and to my surprise, they made the payment on time. For a brief moment, I wondered if maybe this experience would actually teach them something, that they'd finally treat me with the respect I'd been asking for my whole life. But by the second month, the payments came late. By the third, they stopped altogether. I didn't even get a text this time, just silence, as if they thought ignoring me would make me back down. So I followed through. I sent them a formal letter, attaching a copy of the contract they'd signed. I gave them a 14-day grace period to make the payment, or I'd pursue legal action. It wasn't a bluff. I had the contract, the proof of transfer, and a lawyer willing to back me up. The response came 2 days later in the form of a furious call from Dad. "You would really drag your own family to court over money?" I stayed calm. "It's not just money. It's respect. You signed an agreement. You don't get to pick and choose when it matters." He sputtered, cursed under his breath, and hung up on me. But a week later, the payment came through, along with the late fee I'd added per the contract terms. Word started spreading through the family after that. My aunt called me one evening, whispering, "I heard you made your parents sign a loan agreement. Is that true?" "Yep," I said without hesitation. There was a pause, then a chuckle. "Good for you." Someone needed to stand up to them. Mason, on the other hand, didn't take it so well. He showed up at my apartment one night, pounding on the door until I opened it. "You've ruined everything," he shouted. "Do you know how embarrassed I am having to tell my friends my car's barely being paid off?" I crossed my arms. "Good. Maybe you'll learn what it feels like when someone else's decisions control your life." His face went red, but he didn't say another word. He just stormed off, slamming the stairwell door hard enough to rattle the frame. By the time the final payment came through, my savings were higher than they'd ever been. I had finished school, earned another promotion at work, and was in the process of moving into a better apartment in a nicer part of town. I decided to return the favor. I invited my parents and Mason to my new place, not as a peace offering, but as closure. When they walked in, their eyes widened. Floor-to-ceiling windows, city view, sleek furniture, everything I had built without them. Mom tried to smile. "Wow, you've done well for yourself." I met her gaze and nodded. "I have." Dad cleared his throat. "So, does this mean things can go back to normal?" I laughed quietly. "No, it means I don't need you anymore." Then I turned to Mason, who looked like he wanted to sink into the floor, and said calmly, "Congratulations on the car. Hope it was worth it." I walked them to the door, opened it, and stepped aside. "Thanks for coming. We're done here." Mom hesitated, as if she wanted to say something, but I just held her gaze until she finally stepped out into the hall. When the door clicked shut behind them, the apartment was silent, but not empty. It felt full. Full of everything I'd built, everything I'd fought for, everything they thought I'd never have without them. I poured myself a glass of water, sat on the couch, and let out a slow breath. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was proving anything to anyone. I had won. And I knew they finally understood it, too.